Hi guys, welcome back to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, here with Kori Propst, who is our health psychologist. And we are continuing on a topic that we often touch on at least one facet of, which is different forms of goal pursuit. If you're talking about life mastery, and even though we try and cleverly cut that up into different categories, still all comes back down to living your best life requires a lot of goal pursuit in different areas. So today, Kori's going to talk about non-negotiables. How can we frame out exactly what we will not compromise on and what we're willing to negotiate to get those goals? So take it away, Kori.
Yeah, I like this topic. Big surprise, right? It's all about motivation. And I look at non-negotiables, Joe, as commitments, as boundaries in many ways, as commandments for those of you who are religious out there, and as a practice of defining, because I don't think we just, we don't get to a point one day and we're able to say, like, here's my constitution. This is something that we wrestle with, throughout our lives, and that can potentially change. Our non-negotiables hopefully will change as we pursue goals and we figure out like what's most important to us and what really matters. But I see them as the things that give us a foundation from which we can make decisions that are aligned with our values and, like I said, what we feel like we really want to prioritize in our lives to be our healthiest selves. I asked a number of my current clients whether they have any non-negotiables and things that they may have like bright boundaries around in terms of their nutrition, the things they do to stay healthy, self-care, those sorts of things. And I got some really cool answers. What I noticed, the themes, Joe, is that some people listed very practical things like sleep. I don't compromise on my sleep. Don't take those hours away from me. And then there were things like standing up for myself. So it was the more adaptive, emotional boundaries that people set. So one woman said, my boundaries, they've been in most of my adult life, was not to get bullied. That's the one big important thing that she said she does not negotiate around. So with her health, she said, I want to be a strong woman, strong emotionally. And I want to stand. So here's the practical piece of this. I want to stand firm when people want to shove their treats in front of me. So she's taking what feels very constitutional for her as a human being and translating that into these situations that are very practical, where there are other people involved, where she might, start to feel a little bit uncomfortable and bullied, even though that may not even be that person's intention, right? Another person said, non-negotiables for me are exercise and quiet time, stepping away from being around other people, prayer time, and fresh produce. That's a non-negotiable for this person. And she puts herself in situations where she can make that happen. No matter where she goes, she's going to find fresh produce. Exercise seemed to be a big one among most people. But here was a very, very interesting response that I got that kind of led to more discussion between all of us. This person said, I don't think my boundaries are tight enough. I think this is part of the reason why I like goals, because it makes it easier for me to feel okay to prioritize myself. It's an issue I'm finally learning to deal with now that I have a family. So you have a person here whose circumstances have changed, going from single to being married with a child, and how, and you said this in the very beginning of the podcast, Joe, how we have to begin renegotiating what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and what we're going to put front and center and let move to the back burner. I would like to hear from you. I do have some other things I want to add to this, but for yourself personally, are there areas in your life that you have very bright boundaries around and non-negotiables?
Far fewer now than 25 years ago. And I would have to go back to personality psychology and the 24 character strengths that we talk about often.
Yeah.
And early in my life, I would have been very high on faithfulness, orderliness, justice, all of those stalwart type things that made me firm and immovable, which are strengths. But as you always say, taken to an extreme, they become our biggest liability. So now the opposite of those, which are flexible, open-minded, things like that, I'm much more able to take my boundaries and say, these are still important values in my life, but one at a time, they don't make up my entire life. I'm more flexible about how I execute those boundaries. So for me, I would say, listening to your list from clients, certainly self-care at a fundamental level. You mentioned sleep, and I absolutely get 7 hours of sleep as a routine, sometimes 8. If I have to get less, that's fine. That's where I say I'm flexible. I'm not going to live and die for that one flexible, but that's an important one. Training, exercise, that's been, you brought up the word religion. That's been my church forever, which is that time of just, physicality and challenge and grinding physically. That's always been something that is a part of me, and I'll never give that up. I mean, I'll be 95 years old running laps in the nursing home. Other things I could keep going, but I would say, then it kind of bleeds out into the social areas, which are like family. My kids, and those are things where you become, very, very guarded of your principles and values. So, those are just a couple of thoughts that I had.
Well, I appreciate that you recognize that it's changed and shifted over the years, and I'll be the first one to say, yes, I've seen those change within you too, and I've enjoyed the changes, Joe. For me as well, I know that when I was living by myself and had my own space, I was much more rigid and had those like, no, you're not going to get in the way of this happening for me. And I do feel like I've relaxed those lines a bit as well, but I kind of like to look at it from the perspective of, we have these like literally brick wall boundaries. One of my brick wall boundaries is I will not engage in infidelity. Like, if I have a partner, I'm not going to do that. That's a brick wall boundary. There's no flexibility there for me. And I think we can have those in other areas of our lives where we need to learn how to be more adaptive and flexible. Those are more porous. It's kind of like a brick wall versus a screen door, right? And for me, some of those are eating standing up. I try to make a conscious effort to sit down when I'm eating so that I can be more mindful and I'm not just like shoving things in my face, but I eat standing up. I eat when I'm driving. I eat when I'm doing other things. I'm not a saint when it comes to mindful eating. Other things like hours of sleep per night, like we've mentioned. Of course, sleep is a non-negotiable for me, but like we were on this trip last weekend with our new owners, training them, and one night I got 4 hours of sleep. That's not ideal. Kori was not at her best the following day, but then the next day I got 8. So recovery is one of my non-negotiables, and I just think that figuring these out should be one of our non-negotiables. Like, to put ourselves in a position to reflect on how we're responding to our environments, how we're responding to the people around us, whether we're putting our energy and effort into areas that really make a difference, or whether we're giving away our power in some way that is unnecessary. So some of my other non-negotiables, Joe, are, and these may not feel like brick wall, 100% black and white boundaries, because they're not, but to act skillfully. That's a non-negotiable for me. Now, does that mean that 100% of the time I act skillfully? No.
So one of the things, Kori, I think of that metaphor, one of the best I've still ever heard, which is, you start putting the big rocks in a jar until you can't put them, or big rocks, and then pebbles, and then sand, and then water. So have you ever, as a mental health therapist, asked a client or patient to list things like this? Like, we need to get to the core of who you are, what you really want to act upon. So in this format, these non-negotiables, or maybe you've called them values or something. You ever have an exercise like that?
Absolutely. All the time. Because I see us, all of us, we are working, even if we're not aware of it, towards some level of actualization.
So how would you give that to a client or patient? What would be the exercise so that some of our listeners or audience could do that?
One of the simplest things that we can start doing is to take an inventory of how we spend our time and what we think about. That's the first thing. Just get a piece of paper and write down over the course of an entire day what you're doing, how you're spending your time, what you're thinking about, and where your energy is going. Because not only can we then get an idea of what's most important to us, but then we can begin to filter through what maybe we might want to spend less time on, so that we can fill those spaces with the things that do generate positivity, energy, motivation, a sense of vitality, like we talked about yesterday, as we're moving toward a more intrinsic level of motivation. So take a time inventory: time, effort, energy, thoughts, and interests. Take an inventory. That's the first step. Have you ever done anything like that, Joe?
I don't think as a physical, checklist.
Activity?
I know, even going all the way back to, I used to, instead of doing New Year's resolutions, and I mean, way back 25 years ago, I remember sitting in my office as a new business owner, and every year I'd make a list of goals. What do I want to accomplish this year? They weren't all accomplishments as in, terms of business. They were personal and, social. And so, I've done that certainly, but I think those almost become the training wheels for me, that then it becomes a little bit more routine to do that, to take a self-inventory. But as far as, I do remember, and the reason I asked, I remember working with a counselor one time who had me, write some lists down. If we were working on something like anxiety and perfectionism, let's write the things down that you feel, like you said, you spend the most time worrying about or thinking about. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, another way to kind of get to the core of where you're spending a lot of your time and what's most important to you is to just take a notepad or your journal or whatever and go through your house. Go through each room and identify the things that bring you a sense of joy. Maybe there's nothing, and that's a problem. But, look at the books in your bookshelf. What are you reading right now? What do you tend to gravitate towards when you're in a bookstore or you're on Amazon looking at all the books that are out there? What do you tend to want to fuel your mind in with? So that's where I would start for sure.
Cool. Well,
yeah.
I'll let you wrap it up. But the last thing I would say is, as I started my part of the conversation and saying that my boundaries have become a little bit more fluid, I would say, because of my interpretation of these discussions with clients, sometimes if these are ideals that we're placing, not rigid rules. And so if you are doing okay, if you have your top 5 and you're just working on that first one, that's fine. If you're 95% accurate or 80% accurate, and usually you're 5, that's okay. That's progress.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great thing, just to, going back to the training wheels metaphor of saying, I need to start focusing my attention on these things so that I can be very purposeful in what I'm prioritizing and what is non-negotiable. But I love where you started with this, Kori, which is it's a sense of strength. Some of your clients who said, I will not be bullied. I will stand up for myself. I will do this. Those are very self-empowering things. And I love that that's where we started.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind as you're talking, Joe, is just there's a sense of integrity. And our non-negotiables, like you said, don't necessarily mean that we aren't adaptable and we're not resilient when the circumstances change. Non-negotiables actually put us in a position to be those things. So
awesome. Good stuff, Kori. And for you guys watching and listening, thanks. As always, please like, share, get all that stuff out there so we can continue to grow our audience and reach more people with Dr. Propst's just intense wisdom there. So, thank you, Kori, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.